bit of a less active offseason than many had anticipated a few months ago. One area that they have certainly invested in, not only now but into the future, is the point guard position. Why that's so important, especially for this version of the team the Grizzlies are likely going to put out on the court this season, and how could the depth at the position potentially evolve over the next few years? That and much more on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Here we go. And here we go now.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, one and all, to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you're having an outstanding start to your day. You can find myself at StatsSAC on Twitter, my co-host, Michael Cole, at DeMichaelC, as well as the show at Locked On Grizz, and right here on YouTube as well. Just hit the subscribe button below. A fun weekend, as we're going to have multiple podcasts coming out this weekend. Obviously, talked a bit about some critical combos. We talked about Zaire Williams and Dillon Brooks. We talked about Tyus Jones and Brandon Clark. We also talked about John Conchar and Jake LaRavia, some dynamic duos for the Grizzlies who really could help support Ja and Desmond Bane and others with Jaren Jackson Jr. out to start the season. But the other thing that really stands out about this Grizzlies offseason, there's been several, not necessarily several, but there's been a few key narratives, key storylines to this Grizzlies season. Number one, it was them basically consolidating the roster, but doing it in a different way. They shifted their focus, from going with role players who added value in the regular season, like DeAnthony Melton as well as Kyle Anderson, to going younger once again and adding players that they think can give them valuable depth as they go into the playoffs, at Jake LaRavia and David Roddy, and so on. But the other big thing that has stood out about this Grizzlies offseason so far is that Memphis has heavily invested in the point guard position. You would think logically that, let's start out. Let's start with the hierarchy of what they've done. They obviously have invested in Ja Morant. Ja Morant signed his 5-year in what right now is a $193 million deal. His salary, that officially will start during the 23-24 season. If Ja Morant were to make any All-NBA teams, that potentially could go up upwards of $225, $230 million as time goes on. But the Grizzlies have now locked up their franchise player, and one of the bigger and awesome developments of that contract is that Ja Morant did not include a player option. So that means that he is satisfied. He is locked in to being the Grizzlies point guard, not only now, but for at least the next 6 years. And, all things considered, you would expect for it to be beyond that as well. But the Grizzlies have their franchise player committed here for 6 seasons. So you would think that with the Grizzlies' best player being at the point guard position, and them and the Grizzlies locking up, that player in Ja Morant for 6 more years, that depth, that investments would be elsewhere. Because, why would you really want to invest in depth at, the place where you're likely going to be playing Ja Morant 35 to 40 minutes a night? Well, the reason why the Grizzlies decided to continue to heavily invest in the point guard position, even after signing Ja Morant long-term, is to set up the best opportunity to make Ja Morant available, fresh, and as healthy as possible for the playoffs. Again, you've heard me talk about it several times. The Grizzlies aren't paying Jaren Jackson Jr., 30 to 25 million over the next 4 years each, for him to set, records in terms of blocks in the month of January. They're not going to pay Ja Morant on average nearly $40 million for the next 5 seasons after this one to, be able to have a, stretch of 20 games where he scores, 30 points a night. That's great in terms of what those guys can do during the regular season. That helps get the Grizzlies to the playoffs. But the Grizzlies are paying nearly $65 million on average over the next 4 to 5 seasons after this one. They're paying that much money to those 2 players for Ja to be the leader of the offense and Jaren to be the anchor of the defense during playoff series. That's just straightforward what the Grizzlies are looking to do. And so that these players are going to add plenty of value during the regular season, but the Grizzlies have paid this amount of money to Ja and Jaren to be the dynamic duo, the focal point of the offense and the defense in the postseason. And so for them to be able to do that, they have to be fresh, they have to be healthy, they have to be fully in place for them to be able to make the most of their opportunity. And the Grizzlies got a bit of a glimpse of how important that is this season because, yes, the Grizzlies certainly put themselves in a position where they had a chance. They definitely had a chance. If they would have won game one of the second round of the Western Conference semifinals, it could have been a different story. I know, hypothetical, but it could have been. But unfortunately, John Morant got injured. Jaren Jackson Jr. could not stay on the floor, a lot due to foul trouble, what have you. That's just natural things that, a team that's building up like the Grizzlies goes through. But they made their investments. They made their investments in their franchise cornerstones. And the focus for the Grizzlies with these investments is what those cornerstones can do to the playoffs because the Grizzlies are confident that their depth will help them get to the playoffs on an annual basis. And a reason why is the other reason why the Grizzlies have made the investment at the point guard position. It's not only the fact that the Grizzlies are making the investment at the point guard position through Tyus Jones and now also, agreeing to a 4-year deal with Kennedy Chandler. It's not only the fact that Tyus Jones is going to be there to step up and stand out, if you will, when John Morant's not playing. The Grizzlies have invested in Tyus Jones to not only support John Morant, to allow for John Morant to be able to, keep an eye on his minutes, keep an eye on his game played. You've heard me talk about the fact that John Morant playing 65 to 70 games during a season is probably ideal for a player of his playing style and how important he is to the Grizzlies. But also the Grizzlies are able to, potentially make that happen because of how much they trust Tyus Jones. We're talking about a player who is 20-5 last year in games that he started, talking about a player who had the best shooting season of his career. And we're talking about a player that easily can hold his own when it comes to being a spot starter in the lineup. So for anybody who's thinking, okay, why would the Grizzlies potentially invest $15 million over the next 2 years each in a backup point guard to support their franchise player who they're going to start paying nearly $35 million a year from now? Why would they make all that investment? It's to preserve the overall health and freshness of their franchise player in John Morant. It's the trust that they have in Tyus Jones to lead the team if John Morant's not playing because of how well Tyus Jones did last year in a starting role. And it also allows for the Grizzlies to 40 to 45 minutes each night. The Grizzlies, in my opinion, have a top 30 point guard on the court playing. You can even make the argument that Tyus Jones, is better than, some starting point guards. There's a reason why many folks think that the Grizzlies have the best 1-2 combination in the NBA when it comes to the point guard position. It's because of the fact that 40 to 45 minutes a night, the Grizzlies are able to have one of the best offenses on the court because of how efficient, effective, and consistent John Morant and Tyus Jones are. Whether it's John Morant being able, through their playmaking, through their scoring, what have you, you have very productive point guard play. And the Grizzlies are investing in that, not only to preserve the health of Ja throughout the season, not only because of how reliable Tyus Jones is, but also for the fact that you have excellent leaders for a very young roster for 90 to 95% of games each game that you play. So that's the reason why the Grizzlies have invested the money that they have. That's why the Grizzlies are potentially going to be okay in the 23-24 season, paying nearly $15 million to $50 million total dollars to Ja and Tyus Jones. Because of the fact that it allows for them to each night have 40 to 45 minutes of great point guard play on the court, because of the fact that it allows for the Grizzlies to potentially be able to monitor John Morant's overall usage, minutes, games played, to keep him fresh for the playoffs, and also because Tyus Jones has proven to be very valuable, whether it be the floor general, one of the best bench units in the NBA, if not the best, whether it be stepping up as a spot starter, whether it be being able to at times, and Taylor Jenkins is very pinpointed with this, to at times be able to play with John Morant on the court. There's a lot of versatility that Tyus Jones offers in that backup point guard position beyond the consistency that he allows for the Grizzlies to show when he's on the court. So the Grizzlies' investment in their point guard position over the next few years, on paper, it may seem to be a bit overdone. It may seem to be too much of a surplus. But when you go back and you look last year at just how important the overall point guard play for the Grizzlies was, not only in terms of Ja Morant, but also Tyus Jones, you start to again see why the investment is made and why the Grizzlies feel confident it's going to keep them alive when it comes to their winning ways to make the playoffs. But what does this mean now with Kennedy Chandler coming into the equation? Could we see some different things now, different roles for each of these three players now that DeAnthony Melton is gone? We'll talk about that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk with you a bit about Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar. I know we talk about Bet Online and we talk about Built Bar quite a bit, but in this episode, I want to talk with you a bit more about Built Bar. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And just like if you go with Ja Morant or Tyus Jones or someone else in the Grizzlies lineup, the lineup for Built Bars is amazing. Over 18 different flavors to choose from. Built Bars, Built Puffs. You go to Built.com right now, you put in the promo code LOCKED15. You get 15% off the next order from Built Bar. You can go to Built.com right now, put in the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order from Built Bar. Can't thank you enough for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. But as we've discussed, it's about to turn from July into August. And what that means is whoever you listen to outside of basketball, when it comes to the Locked On family of podcasts, you're going to find some news going on. Locked On MLB with the trade deadline around the corner. Your favorite Locked On NFL or Locked On College sports show. That's going to be the place to go as we're a month away from the NFL and college football season started. All that should be your second listen of the day after you make Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. So the Grizzlies, again, have made some heavy investments. A 5-year, $193 million deal with Ja Morant that starts in the 23-24 season. 2-year, $15 million, or two-year, $30 million deal with Tyus Jones, paying him $15 million each for the next 2 seasons. And then the Grizzlies also invested a second-round pick and signed Kennedy Chandler to a 4-year deal. The thing that stands out is now the Grizzlies have invested, quite a bit of money, multiple years, to 3 different point guards. And you come to think to yourself, okay, these are 3 point guards whose styles of play are a bit different when you look at what each of them are successful at. They're all guards who are on the smaller side, so it may not necessarily seem as if there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of room for growth when it comes to playing them together. But again, as Zach Kleiman and Taylor Jenkins have both alluded to, when they make roster moves, it's not just about the short-term future. It's about the long-term future as well. But the short term does matter. And the reason why that is because the Grizzlies are now without DeAnthony Melton. And I know that DeAnthony Melton did not play, a pivotal role as a point guard for this team. But what he was he was a part of a guard group last year when it came to Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Melton, and Tyus Jones. That was among one of the most productive guard groups in the NBA. Of the Grizzlies' overall points per game, they had one of the highest percentages in the NBA of how much of those points came from their guard group. This is one of the best shooting guard groups in the NBA. This guard group was third in 3-pointers in terms of guard groups in the NBA last year per game during the regular season. One of the most productive playmaking groups of guards in the NBA during the regular season. So my point is that in terms of the Grizzlies' strength, where the Grizzlies truly had an advantage last year, it was from their guard group. And now you're missing one of your most pivotal points of that group, your second leading 3-point shooter, one of your better creators of turnovers, and one of your better bench chases in DeAnthony Melton. Now, the Grizzlies hope that John Conchar may be able to step up in that role, but it also is going to have to take, a bit more. You may see some different lineups, different responsibilities fall on other guards to make up for the loss of DeAnthony Melton. And one of the things that does stand out is the potential to see Tyus Jones and Ja Morant on the floor more. Now, it may not seem like that would be that much of a success story when it comes to Ja Morant and Tyus Jones being on the court together. But it's hard to deny that the numbers are very, very good. And you would think that potentially the numbers would be good because the Grizzlies would be able to do a very good job of limiting turnovers. With those two on the court, they would do a very good job in the half-court offense, what have you. But actually, in 383 non-garbage time regular season possessions last year, the strength of lineups that had Ja and Tyus on the court was actually defensive lineups. And you wouldn't think that that would be the case with the fact that Tyus Jones and Ja Morant, in terms of their individual value added, it's a lot more focused on the offensive end than the defensive end. But again, it comes down to a team concept. When both of those players are in the court, they do a very good job of causing the opposition into situations where they force turnovers. You know, one of the better examples that we have of Tyus Jones and Ja Morant playing on the court together and it being successful was in last year's playoffs. I believe it was Game 5, where the Grizzlies went small. They had Dillon Brooks at the 4. They had Brandon Clark at the 5. This was the game where Dillon Brooks did an excellent job guarding Karl-Anthony Towns over the last 7 minutes. And I asked Ja Morant directly after that game, Ja, why going small? Why was this lineup with you and Tyus on the court together for that stretch of time? Why do you feel it was so effective defensively? And he said, with the small lineup, we were able to fly around. We were able to stay in front of guys. We were able to keep guys out of their normal routine to be able to find shots. And so, you know, we talk about all the time about, you know, what causes, you know, what allows for the Grizzlies to be able to cause these turnovers, what allows for the Grizzlies to disrupt the overall flow of the opposition's offense. Well, one of the things that specific lineup does when you have Ja and Tyus on the court, when you look at the film, one specific thing that does stand out is that the Grizzlies are consistently able to move around. Their flying, their scrambling ability is very, very good to stay in front of the opposing offensive player to not allow for them to be able to get easy looks at the basket. Again, Tyus Jones, Ja Morant, others, they may not be the biggest guys, but their quickness and their intelligence allows for them to stay in front of guys, and that's going to keep the offense from being able to find shots consistently. What that leads to is the opposing offense not being able to run its plays. You then get frantic passing, you get panicking, what have you. That leads to turnovers, and now what you've got is two of the better fast break point guards in the NBA on the court together at the same time, leading the fast break, helping the defense turn into good offense. So there is some potential there. And again, it may not seem like it. You may think that with Ja Morant, you need a bigger guard to play with him. Desmond Bane is evidence. But Taylor Jenkins has done a very good job over the past 2 years of inserting the Tyus Jones, Ja Morant lineups. They're not meant to last a while. You're not looking to play those two together 20 minutes a night. But if you put them together in spurts for 2 or 3 minutes in the first half, maybe a minute or two in the second half, the results typically are there, especially when the Grizzlies can make opposing defenses not be able to settle into what they're looking to do. So there's more. So numbers have suggested that there may be more potential, and I'll speak for myself, there may be more potential for a Ja Tyus lineup to be used more frequently than many may think. Again, you don't use it over long stretches, but if you strategically can use it in short spurts, the playoffs last year are a good example to suggest that it can be successful. So again, the whole idea behind the Grizzlies' investment in being able to have arguably the best point guard depth in the league is not just about keeping Ja fresh and healthy going into the playoffs. It's not just about investing in a player like Tyus Jones, who offers so much versatility and leading what has arguably been the best unit in the NBA over the past few years, plus his overall shooting ability. And it's not only Ja and Tyus being able to play together. It's the versatility that comes with having two very good basketball players on the court for 40 to 45 minutes a night. 10 of those 40 to 45 minutes may be together. If not that, then you have one of the two leading the Grizzlies' charge on a nightly basis. So it's depth, it's versatility, it's keeping each player healthy, and it's the reliability that the Grizzlies have on knowing when one of those two players are on the court, the Grizzlies are likely going to play winning basketball. But does that trickle down to Kennedy Chandler? With his presence in place now, what does that potentially mean over the next year or two as the point guard position evolves? We'll discuss that in just a moment. We can't thank you enough for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen of the day. We'll continue to look at many different storylines from the offseason going into next season that really stand out about the Grizzlies. What's different now from what was different a year ago, so on and so forth. That and much more later on this week on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So as I mentioned, the way that the payout structure looks for the Grizzlies at the point guard position this season and next season. Ja Morant, I believe, is going to make about $11 million this year. Tyus Jones, obviously, $15 million as a backup point guard. It's kind of crazy. Tyus, once again, is going to be making more this year than Ja Morant did, or than Ja Morant will during the 2022-2023 season. But so you've got both those players locked up for this year, and nearly a combined 25 to 27 million total in those two players for this season. And then, of course, you got Kennedy Chandler in the first year of his contract. Next year is when it really gets interesting, because a year from now, the Grizzlies are going to go into the 23-24 season with $50 million in commitments to their point guard position. Nearly 33 to 34 million to Ja Morant, 15 or so million to Tyus Jones, and I believe it's around 1 to 2 million for Kennedy Chandler. That's about 50 million. But the reason why it's fine, the reason why the Grizzlies are okay with that big of a spike in their investment in the point guard position is because they trust for the point guard position to figure itself out. They're going to look to see if, once again, for the second straight year, the point guard position can be a big area of strength, a big advantage area for the Grizzlies, and being able to feature Ja or Tyus 40 to 45 minutes a night, using them together in short spurts, having both of them lead the offense, having Tyus be able to step in and play that starting role in place of Ja in nights where he may have off or he may be recovering from injury. But then Kennedy Chandler's role becomes very interesting as well. I mentioned with David Williams of the Sports Ethos podcast, I don't think that Kennedy Chandler is going to have a huge role in the Grizzlies rotation. As a matter of fact, I don't think that he's going to be a part of the rotation really at all when the Grizzlies have health on their side. The only time this season where I think that Kennedy Chandler is truly going to have a role in the rotation is when he may get some backup point guard minutes in stretches of the season where Ja may be out and it's Tyus starting. That's where I feel that Kennedy Chandler is going to actually have a role on the actual Grizzlies. Beyond that, I believe that he's going to spend many nights down in South Haven, such as Santi Aldama did last year, and I actually do think that's going to be very productive for Kennedy Chandler as he develops his shot. Again, with the guard that's undersized in his case, developing a reliable floater. And again, there's no better combination of teachers than Ja Morant and Tyus Jones, Brandon Clark as well. But Kennedy Chandler developing his offensive game, putting more confidence in putting his defensive play on display, having him do that in South Haven with very little pressure, I think is what works out best for both his development and for the Grizzlies. But say we go through this next season, and, we've had a successful year once again from Ja. Tyus Jones has proven to be one of the better pack-up point guards in the league, and Kennedy Chandler has developed well. Well, then the whole idea in making the investment that the Grizzlies did in Tyus Jones and Kennedy Chandler this offseason, it's not just about what they can provide on the court this upcoming season. It's about what they can provide as potential assets moving forward. Because a year from now, if Ja Morant has had a healthy season, he's built off of, he's played another All-NBA type season, he's stayed healthy, the Grizzlies, he made some more noise in the playoffs, Kennedy Chandler has developed well as the backup point guard, then a year from now, perhaps the Grizzlies are in a position where they're like, okay, we're going to have to start paying Ja. We're happy with the development of Kennedy Chandler. Tyus Jones is now out here as a expiring $15 million trade asset that the Grizzlies could potentially dangle in the right deal for potential trades to add to the roster. We've seen the Grizzlies do this time and time again. Investing in assets that when they arrive at when they become an expiring asset, the Grizzlies use present value to get future value. And I know that that's not a conversation people want to continue having, especially coming off last season. But that's how small markets, and I know that we're not supposed to say that, but that's how small markets, I'll go ahead and say it, that's how they continue to keep their roster, to keep their success going, to stay ahead of the curve. They consistently plan for the future by using present assets. And so if Ja Morant has an outstanding season once again, Kennedy Chandler has shown great development, the Grizzlies can then take Tyus Jones, and he can be a very attractive trade piece. Not necessarily a one-to-one with another team where he's the money matching aspect of the Grizzlies, bringing in, a piece that could, be a more valuable part of their future. But Tyus Jones potentially could be used in a 3 or 4 team trade to go to another team that's looking to contend, that really needs help at the point guard position. And the Grizzlies are able to bring in whatever they may value more in the future than Tyus Jones. So the whole idea behind the Grizzlies investing heavily in their point guard position now is them once again setting themselves up in multiple ways, on the court and off, to be able to take advantage, to be able to find short-term and long-term value in their investments. Not only do they have the hierarchy of their point guard position hopefully in place for the next 3 to 5 years, they also have put together the best 1-2 combination of point guards in the league that they'll be able to feature over the next few years. And if the development of Kennedy Chandler takes care of itself and it forces the Grizzlies in a good position to where they may have too many point guards, then you could use Tyus Jones as an asset in a trade. And from your investment this year in the point guard position, a year from now, you found yourself in position to use Tyus Jones to go bring in a piece to add to Ja, Jaren, and Bane that could be more valuable as time goes on. It's continuing to play the long game for the Grizzlies. And we're not just talking about them doubling down on youth in general. We're not just talking about them wanting to keep their contention window open. We're talking about the reason why they're making investments where you may not necessarily think it's the most logical place to make the investments. But the reason why the Grizzlies are heavily invested in their point guard position is because of how important it is to the development of their current roster, how important it is to the health and overall freshness of their franchise player when high leverage and playoff situations come over the next few years, but also because it can be a point of surplus. It can be a point of strength in future moves that can make a lot of sense for the Grizzlies to really take that next step as a contender for years to come. Now, at the end of the day, if that doesn't happen, if 2 summers from now, we're talking about Tyus Jones maybe signing another extension, or at this point in time, leaving to take on a better opportunity, him only being 25, almost 26 still, makes this the case. If Tyus Jones and Ja Morant play together for another 2 years, there's nothing wrong with that. But one of the biggest success stories for the Grizzlies over the past few years has been when they make moves, how many different options it gives them on and off the court to make other moves. And that's what investing so heavily in the point guard position this summer has allowed for the Grizzlies to do. And hopefully in time, we'll be able to see the Grizzlies remain able to have plenty of options to do with that point guard position and see them truly benefit from it. So yes, the Grizzlies have invested in their franchise player, but it's not just directly the investment they made in him. It's the investment they made in his depth to keep him healthy and fresh and keep him at the best that he can be when it matters most, but also for the rest of the roster. Tyus Jones and Kennedy Chandler could be very, very, very good backup floor generals, not only for the next year or two, but hopefully going forward for many years to come. And from that depth, the Grizzlies may be able to find ways to allow for that depth to lead to acquisitions that could be more valuable for the team as time moves on. That's the mantra of the Grizzlies. Whenever they make moves, it's not just for the now, it's for the future. And the great thing is they keep making moves that they know are going to benefit them in the short term, and they have a very good inkling it should benefit them in the long term as well. Again, you can find me at StatsSAC on Twitter. You can find the show right here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button below, and also free on all podcast platforms as well as at Locked On Grizz on Twitter as well. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.